Welcome in, whiskey freaks, to the Blind Tasting Podcast, your number one attitude in the whiskey destination. I'm John Stark, and I'll be bringing you candid and sometimes irreverent whiskey news, opinions, and reviews on the industry and the products they've been bringing us for hundreds of years. Today, we're going to approach things just a little differently. You know, it's a big world out there, and if you tuned in last week, we went on a bit of a whiskey journey together, exploring some incredible places. We hit Japan, we went to Russia, yes, we went to Russia, and of course, the United States. I mean, whiskey has just become this international phenomenon, and it really reaches all corners of the globe nowadays. But today, I want to bring things a little closer to home, right here in the heartland of America. You know, every once in a while, I stumble upon somewhere that feels truly special. One of those places to me is Brickway Brewery and Distillery, right in the middle of Nebraska. So today, I'm putting Brickway in the spotlight. We're going to dig into what they bring to the whiskey world and also to their community as a whole, right there in the heart of Omaha, Nebraska. I want to see what makes them stand out. And yeah, I'm also going to review some of their whiskey today. So hang with me for a bit while we dive into the largest distillery in the state of Nebraska, Brickway Brewery and Distillery. So first, before I get ahead of myself here, I'm going to pour a splash of Larceny Barrel Proof, to stimulate the conversation today. So I picked this bottle up, I guess it was about 2 months ago in Vandalia, Illinois. It's about an hour from the house here and about an hour and 10 minutes from St. Louis. I grabbed it at a liquor store. It was right across the street from a giant dinosaur, and that's a story for another day. Anyway, I'm drinking out of my Blind Tasting Podcast Etch Rocks glass today. I'm going to get a sip here and I'm going to get focused. So, it's really funny and it's serendipitous. And for all you folks who have infinity bottles, that means it was kind of an accident. Serendipitous that I even found this distillery in Nebraska. What happened was I tagged along with the wife on a work trip back in September. And suffice it to say, I was pretty bored hanging out at the hotel. So on a whim, I Googled places to eat near me. And as the results populated on my Samsung Galaxy screen, a big smile came to my face. The first result that popped up on the screen was a distillery. I thought, well, now this might be cool. They served food, and doggone it, they had beer and whiskey. Now, I'm not especially into beer, but the whiskey, I'll take the whiskey. So at this point, I'm already sold. Remember, I'm bored, and I'm hungry too. So out the door I go, walking over a mile across a town I'd never explored to a distillery I'd never even heard of. But before I get to the distillery and my story, let me give you a bit more background on Brickway in general. So, the brewery and distillery is located in Omaha's historic Old Market District. It's a very hip and cool part of town, really. The streets around the area are paved with, you guessed it, bricks. Now, they opened Brickway in 2013 and started out brewing just a few beers. I had a Pilsner, a Hefeweizen, India Pale Ale, an Oatmeal Stout. But seeing that Zach, he's the owner and master distiller, who just happens to have degrees in microbiology and chemistry. Oh, also, he just happens to have earned a master's degree in brewing and distilling in Scotland. So Zach's got this natural-born whiskey love. So his focus quickly expanded from just beer to, you guessed it, distilling whiskey. Of course, they had to wait for the whiskey to age. So in the meantime, they churned out rum and vodka and gin. And that's pretty typical for smaller distillers starting out. I mean, you got to make money along the way, you got to pay the bills, and you can't rush the whiskey. Now, I'd be pretty irresponsible if I didn't mention the reason behind their whole operation. The entire inspiration behind Brickway. The reason why. Well, the inspiration for Brickway started with just that. Why? So, sadly, Zach lost his father at a fairly young age, and he says it taught him that a beer or a cocktail, it had the ability to lift an occasion, no matter if you're celebrating, commiserating, or commemorating. The story goes, at Christmas, 6 weeks after the passing of his father, Zach gave everybody 2 beers that he'd brewed in honor of his late dad. 1 beer was to save, 1 beer was to drink. So Zach gave a brief speech, and as he gave the speech, some people cried, some people laughed. Zach knew at that point, that very moment had been changed with his beer. And to this day, celebrate, commiserate, commemorate is the motto at Brickway. Now, they brew a myriad of beers and spirits, really just too numerous for me to mention on this quick podcast today, but suffice it to say, they really have something for everyone. Listen, there's so much more to say about Zach and his crew, but I really want to get down to business and tell you the rest of my story about this kind of accidental visit to Brickway. So I get to the place right the minute they open, and the bartender, she seemed truly happy to see me there. I didn't get her name, but she was super cool. Anyway, first thing I noticed was the cool vibe. The space has this rustic industrial feel. Think exposed brick, dark wood, polished metal. The lighting is warm. It's just a super cozy ambiance. And the pot still, this gigantic pot still that sits in the back corner of the room, well, that lets you know when you're in the right place to get some good local whiskey. I saw an interview where when Zach was asked about his greatest accomplishment so far in life, he said that other than his kids, that the sherry cask finished single malt whiskey that he produced was his most awesome creation. So clearly I had to try that. I also saw the double barrel bourbon on the bar, and I decided I'd give that a go as well. Like I said, the bartender was super cool. She poured each of my 1 ounce pours, and I got right to tasting, and I made quite a few notes that I'm going to share with you today. Now, if you listen to the pod, you know how much it pisses me off when a distiller isn't transparent. Or worse yet, they say, look how open and transparent we are. And then you can't find anywhere what the hell is in the whiskey. Good news, folks. Brickway, Zach, these guys, they tell you what you're drinking in great detail. You can tell they're 100% proud of what they're doing there, and they don't have any qualms about the mash bill, the aging, and all that. Oh, and one more thing. I also had the pleasure of visiting with Jason Dworak. He's a VP at Brickway. We talked a while about the future of Brickway, and he shared a lot of big things they hope to see come to fruition in the very near future. He mentioned they do distill on site there, but that they had to actually expand to a site in nearby Bellevue, Nebraska, because they've grown so much over the last few years. That's pretty exciting. So real quick, and I'd be remiss if I forget to mention, they won Nebraska Distillery of the Year in 2020. And they have a stack of awards to go along with that honor, as well as many others for their individual whiskeys. And Brickway, they're huge in the community. Get this. They donate 1% of revenue to local charities, and they give 2% of their employees' time back to local communities as well. It's really amazing stuff, kids. They really just like to give back at Brickway. So, let's get into the whiskey. And full disclosure, I wasn't able to bring any of the whiskey home with me because I wasn't checking luggage. I travel light. It drives my wife crazy, but that's what I do. And I wasn't smart enough to think ahead, and quite frankly, I'm super pissed about that, but I really had no choice. So I came home empty-handed, but I did take a lot of notes while I was there. Okay, so on to the reviews. Now, based on it being Zach's greatest accomplishment in life, I felt compelled to try the Sherry Cask Single Malt Whiskey, and so I'm going to start with that one. The Sherry Cask Single Malt Whiskey, of course, is 100% malted barley. This one comes in at 90 proof, and they age it first in American oak barrels, and then it gets a secondary finishing in Spanish Oloroso sherry casks. Now, this type of finishing is not unusual in the whiskey world. There are quite a few whiskeys out there that are finished in sherry casks. You've got Macallan, and even some American whiskeys are finished in sherry, like Angel's Envy. There's actually a big, long list that I'm not going to read off to you that finish in sherry. There's just too many to mention because it's really become a thing. So I was not in any rush, so I got to spend a good bit of time analyzing these whiskeys, and I can tell this is a young one. Probably 2 to 3 years old, then finished in those sherry casks. It's really the only piece of the puzzle I couldn't find And part of that's my bad because I probably could have talked to Jason about it, but really it slipped my mind. As far as the color goes, the color on the sherry cask single malt, it's a rich amber looking or a deep gold in the Glencairn. So as I swirled it around, I could tell it was somewhat young by the minimal amount of legs I was getting. But remember, this was kind of an accident that I'm even at this place, so I'm still pretty excited to get whiskey on an otherwise boring day. So I'm not worried about that at this point. On the nose, you get a lot of intense notes of dark fruit. I was getting plum, maybe a bit of raisin. There's a bit of mustiness in there for good measure. It's really intriguing, but it's pleasant for sure. Now, my first sip brought me lots of ripe plum, and that stands to reason off what I got from the nose. I got strong oak notes, and that sherry influence, that finishing is very prominent here. I got layers of rich sweetness, and those dry, dark fruit notes I got on the nose, they carry through all the way as I chew through this whiskey. I also got a tinge of toasty oak and just slightest bit of dark chocolate, just a little bit at the tail end. So I have to say, the finish was just incredible. It's not a quick fade. It's this long, lingering finish that feels like it's going on forever. It's like this gentle warmth that settles in your chest. And honestly, this whiskey drinks well above its proof point, but in a good way. There's nothing rough about it. It's just a nice, comforting Scottish hug. I don't know, Scottish hug, is that a thing? I might have just coined a new phrase here, guys. Anyway, so back to the finish. Yeah, that sherry cask influence was super prominent, and I really believe both wine drinkers and whiskey lovers are going to appreciate it. It's got this wonderful balance to it that would make it enjoyable for really a wide range of palates. And for as young as it probably is, overall, it's a fantastic pour. So my next selection was a pour of Brickway Double Barrel Bourbon. The details, or as the cool kids say, deets, are as follows. And listen up, kids. This stuff is very cool. The mash bill is 52% corn, 33% barley, 9% white wheat, and 6% rye. It's double pot distilled, then aged in charred American oak barrels for 3 years. And then get this, it's aged a bit more, and they're used single malt barrels. So as you can imagine, I'm super intrigued about this one. Now, my understanding of white wheat is that white wheat flour, it has a milder, sweeter flavor than regular wheat. So I guess we might expect this stuff to be a little sweeter. Let's see. It comes in at 86 proof, which was, okay, that was really my only concern at this point. And I typically like a bit higher proof, but again, I'm not working today and I've got whiskey in front of me, so I'm keeping an open mind at this point. The color of this whiskey is super light amber. It's got just the slightest reddish tint to it. It really looks older than what it is. And as you know, I say the color or the hue of the whiskey in your glass can sometimes give you an idea of how flavorful it will be in your mouth. Now, that's not always the case, but I found it is often true, so I mention it every single time. Now, on the nose, there's absolutely no alcohol on the nose. Probably something to do with the low proof point at 86, but that might also be an indicator of quite possibly a damn good bourbon here. So, again, let's find out. I got a rich mix of light fruit, maybe orchard fruit like pear. And after I nosed it quite a bit more, I really kind of settled on pear. Also picked up some light caramel notes and a tinge, just a teensy tinge of kind of a pleasant, soft oak. Now on the palate was not surprising me at this point. The nose didn't double cross me. Sometimes you're going to get that nose, it's going to lead you down a terrible, terrible path. I didn't get that here. This whiskey led me to that palate that was truthful, and it was kind of a syrupy pear note with caramel, and that really came through hardcore. And like the nose, that teensy bit of oak was there too. There really were no surprises here. The finish is what I call clean, super light, super pleasant. Now, as I sat there mulling it over, the one bourbon that came to my mind, and I've reviewed it before, and the notes were so damn similar that these two seemed separated at birth to me. It was the Starlight Carl T. Huber 92 proof bourbon whiskey. Now, Starlight is another distillery you may not have heard of. They're out of Indiana, and they put out quite a few really terrific bourbons and whiskeys, and I think they even have some wines that they put out as well. This Brickway Double Barrel, to me, it's refreshing. I don't think I've ever used that term to describe a bourbon, but here I am today saying that word. Refreshing. Let me explain what I mean by that. Now, believe it or not, this is one bourbon I would also actually put over ice, sit out on the patio on a hot summer day, and sip away. And I got to tell you, this stuff is dangerously good in that it's just 86 proof. You might find that bottle empty pretty darn quick. This is a bourbon for every man and woman. And I believe everyone will like it because it's so approachable. Like I said, there's no alcohol in the nose. It's got that sweet fruitiness, all that stuff. Now, speaking for myself, what would I like to see? I'd like to see this at 100 proof. I'd like to try it at 100. I think 100 proof might make this a serious banger. Keep in mind, as it is, it's still solid. I truly think this double barrel bourbon from Brickway would stack up against any bourbon of similar ages for sure. So I would say definitely try it if you can get your hands on it. Now, you're probably wondering what's the verdict on these two whiskeys from Brickway. Now, the verdict today is try them, buy them, share them with friends. Whiskey freaks, if you ever find yourself in Omaha, Nebraska, and you're a little bit thirsty, do yourself a favor. Head over to Brickway, walk right in, grab yourself a pint, maybe a nice pour of something special like I did, and just take it all in. Because whether you're there to celebrate, commiserate, or commemorate, trust me, you'll be glad you made the stop. Brickway's just got something for every moment and every person. They're what we call in the Midwest good people. So give them your business. And remember, kids, this is not Fight Club. Tell your friends. Tell your enemies. Tell your jackass neighbor who still hasn't given you your chainsaw back. Spread the word about this podcast and don't ever forget to listen to the Blind Tasting Podcast. I command you. Okay, no, I don't actually command you. But you should listen and you should tell your friends too. Oh, and real quick, before I sign off here, next episode is going to be a sip-along. I'm going to be reviewing Woodford Reserve Straight Malt Whisky, so if you want to meet up with me and go through it together, make sure you have that on hand. I think it'll kind of be a fun twist on things, and either way, we get to drink whiskey, so there's that. Last but not least, I got to give a shout out to the farmers, distillery production guys and gals, the warehouse workers, the bottlers, and the truck drivers. They're the ones that make it happen. So cheers to all of them. Well, that's all I got for today, Whiskey Freaks. Thanks for listening to the Blind Tasting Podcast, your #1 attitudinal whiskey destination.